Today I've got quite a few things to share with you, so let's dive in. First of all, changes in household size. I probably don't need to point this out again, but households keep getting smaller and smaller and smaller. As marriage rates decline, fertility rates are through the floor. They are an absolute disaster in most areas of the Western world and some of the Eastern world as well. We see much smaller household sizes in the United States. And what does this mean? This means more housing demand. If you have fewer people per house, you obviously need more housing units for those people, right? Because they're just a much smaller household size. And as we look at this through the years, the chart I'm showing starts in the late 1940s, the post-World War II baby boom, of course. We saw household sizes max out into the early to maybe even mid-60s, and they've been declining and declining ever since. Well, why has that happened? Think of all the incredibly amazing things, and I don't mean this in a good way. I mean this in a way that had huge influences on society. You can choose whether it's good or bad. I say most of these things turned out to be bad news overall. But we had birth control, right? That changed the world. It was an absolute game changer for the world when the pill came out. We had the rise of second wave feminism. A woman needs a man like a fish needs a bicycle, Gloria Steinem said. And that just proliferated through colleges, reducing the birth rate of educated, mostly white people. And so we saw birth rates plummet because of that. And then we had the media frenzy that really just told the world they should be single, lonely, and childless. And so what we get? That's exactly what we got. We got massive spikes in depression rates, suicide rates, and it's just changed everything. But what does it mean to real estate? Well, it means smaller household sizes, and that means more demand for housing units. As I have mentioned many times on the show, think about being a government official back in maybe the late 1950s. I mean, this is sort of no particular exact time, right? It's just sort of the zeitgeist of the culture and of what economists were thinking and what taxing agencies were thinking, taxing authorities were thinking, not just in the US, but in many other places around the world. They were thinking, gosh, half of the population is not being taxed. We've got to increase tax revenue. How do we increase tax revenue? We got to get women out of the house where we can't count them economically, not directly, of course. Being a stay-at-home mom and being a good mother and keeping an eye on your kids is probably the most important thing ever in history, right? That's super important. So if we want to get more tax revenue, we've got to get women into the workforce. So that's what they did. And then think of being a CEO or a member of some board of directors or any higher up person in any consumer products company. Well, how do we sell more of our products? That's always the question, right? We want to sell more toasters. We want to sell more sofas. We want to sell more beds. We want to sell more of everything. How do we do that? Well, how do we sell more dining room tables? How do we sell more kitchen appliances? How do we sell more dishes and silverware and all of this stuff, right? We make them have two households rather than just one. We create two households where there was just one, because when you just have people sharing stuff, you have less demand for your products. And so we've got to discourage marriage and we've got to encourage divorce. So you saw the media frenzy of really the 70s, and I always point to the movie Kramer versus Kramer as a huge influence on this, but there were countless other movies and TV shows. There became like a whole industry of, hey, we want to expand the wedding planning industry, so let's make weddings just super elaborate and expensive, get people to blow all their money when they could use all that money they spent on the wedding to buy a house. And then we want to encourage divorce. so we can sell more products. And you can just see how obvious this is, right? This is so obvious. And then if you want to get even more diabolical about the whole thing, we want to take those kids away from that mother and we want to put them in brainwashing institutions known as public schools. So all of this contributes to a smaller household size and the need for more houses. And by the way, I should also mention apartment developers, home builders, all of them love this. They want a smaller household and they want to sell more housing units, right? So same thing goes for them. And then we see the percentage of households by type, and this is absolutely shocking. I mean, it is shocking that in the course of just a few decades, married households was at like 80%, and now it's below 50%. Like that is mind-boggling. And then the rise of non-family households, aka roommates or co-living arrangements. And then other family households, and I honestly don't know exactly what that means, but that has increased slightly. But the most staggering statistic here is the decline of married households. I mean, folks, many of you were alive at the time this stat starts, right? During the baby boom era. And now you saw married households decline from 80% to in the 40s, about 47%. I mean, that is absolutely shocking. Like, you really have to sit and ponder the massive, massive economic and cultural significance of the decline of marriage. It is truly, truly shocking. And then you had other things. You had LBJ, Lyndon Baines Johnson, who was an awful president. And I don't know, was he behind the assassination of his predecessor, Kennedy, right? The truth about that story has yet to be told. We all know the story has a million holes in it, and the government just won't tell the truth about it. But, Trump released a lot of those documents, but there was no smoking gun, so far as I know, because you can't get any media attention for this type of stuff because it's like everything has become a scam, everything has become a cover-up. And maybe it was always that way, and maybe we're just more aware of it nowadays. And so we complain about it more and we see it more, and maybe we're just more aware of it, right? But regardless, so he had the Great Society plan where the government would step in and be very involved in all of our lives. And so out of that, I don't know exactly what year it was, but somewhere in the 70s, I believe, don't quote me on that, but we saw aid to families with dependent children. And so that made a massive increase in fatherless homes where there was no father. They encouraged, literally encouraged with money, with dollars, marriages to split up, right? Or to never happen, right? And we saw this, this massive destruction of the family unit. And so there are many factors, of course. These are very complex issues. You've got to peel back the layers of the onion. There are many, many layers, cultural and economic layers, and so forth. Okay, and then here's the rise of living alone. And here you see another staggering difference. You see about 13 million households, right, that were living alone, dates back to the 60s. And now we see basically almost half of all households are one person. Remember, every person needs their own coffee maker and needs their own sofa and needs their own living room chairs and needs their own dresser and needs their own bed and needs all their own stuff in their own house, right? All of these materials, if you are a consumer products company and you are selling into this trend, your business has massively increased. And if you're taxing into this trend, your tax revenue and the GDP has massively increased. But for us as real estate investors, it all ties in. More housing demand. And as far as I can tell, these numbers are only going to get worse or better, depending on how you look at it, right? Economically, you can serve this audience, right? You can serve these people that need housing by letting them rent that housing from you, right? So that's the opportunity for you. And here's just another way to look at the decline in household size. And you see that we're at about 2.51 as of last year. And that might sound like, well, Jason, that's pretty good, actually. There's still a fair number of people per household. Not really. Think about it. You're considering roommates, co-living arrangements, multi-generational living, children, couples, like everything in there. Okay, this is a massive, massive decrease in people per household. So that just leads to more and more demand for rental housing that you as an investor can provide. Okay, so let's take a look at what has been going on the past year. The market is very muted. It is getting busier though. So in about a month, we're going to see some new stats, and we're going to see that there's definitely an uptick in real estate business. The mortgage rates came down, and that is definitely causing a small buying frenzy. And we're definitely seeing, like over here, we've definitely seen business improve. No question. The past 2 months has been much better than it has been the last couple of years. And so we're up about 2.2%. Again, nothing to write home about, nothing too exciting year over year in terms of prices. And, we've got to always remember, as this market is kind of muted, what choices do we really have as an investor? And I'm going to show you a chart. And for those listening on audio only, I will explain it to you because this is going to absolutely blow your mind. It is mind-boggling. So what choices do we have? Well, we can invest in the stock market. We can invest in a syndication or a fund. And so many of these syndicators and so many of these fund managers have not been discovered yet as the scam artists and criminals they are. Okay? Remember commandment number 3, thou shalt maintain control. That means be a direct investor. When you are not a direct investor and you violate my commandment number 3 of the 10 commandments of successful investing, you leave yourself susceptible to 3 major problems. Number 1, you might be investing with a crook. Number 2, you might be investing with an idiot. And number 3, assuming they're honest and competent, which those are big hurdles, they take a huge management fee off the top for managing the deal. And remember, the management fee is never what it says, ever, because they are in control of how they get to spend your money. Are they putting all sorts of things into the business? Are they using the money you invested in their syndication deal, in their fund that they're running? Are they using that money to basically pay for advertising to get new investors into their next deal? Are they using that money to wine and dine investors? Are they basically hiring contractors to work on their properties, and then that contractor got so much business from them that they're basically influence peddling, that they're doing the addition onto their home for free? But basically that's baked into the price of what they paid for in terms of building that apartment complex or remodeling that apartment complex or maintaining that apartment complex. They're getting all sorts of favoritism at your cost. And you just can't see this unless you were really, really to audit their books. And you would have to figure out, it's so complicated to do this, you would have to figure out what the reasonable price is. And did they get multiple bids? Did they select the lowest price bid? And they can come up with all sorts of reasons for their decisions. And they don't even have to, because they're protected in law by something called the business judgment rule. Look it up. I'm not an attorney, but you can look this up and you can learn about it. The business judgment rule basically gives these people that are essentially skimming all your money off of your return on investment that you should be getting. They've got wide latitude under the law to operate the syndication or the fund however they want to, okay? And so remember, they might be a crook. It took 35 years to discover that Bernie Madoff was a crook, okay? A lot of these people that you think are reputable today, that are running some fund or some syndication and taking your money, They just haven't been exposed yet. And you know what? They may actually never be exposed. They may never get caught. Bernie Madoff, running his huge Ponzi scheme, may have never been caught. The lesson here is be a direct investor. Don't get ripped off by a crook. Don't lose money because you invested with someone who's basically incompetent. And there's a lot of very rich, very successful, very incompetent people. Believe me, I have met many of them. They are really no big deal, okay? They are really, really no big deal. And then the third problem is they take a giant management fee off the top. Now they're going to do that just in their percentage that they take. They're going to take a promoter fee. They're going to take an acquisition fee, a disposition fee. They're going to get all sorts of other little fees. They're going to have their own management company manage the deal, okay, and pay them with your money, whatever they want. So be a direct investor. Just buy some houses, okay? Buy some houses and hold on to them and ideally self-manage them. But if you don't want to self-manage them, use a property manager. At least with a property manager, it's way more transparent than it is with a Wall Street investment, a syndication, or a fund. You really know what's going on and you will be in control.